Hello and welcome to Real NFL Talk. Today, I'd like to talk about Gil Brandt's all-time players lists. These are lists that recently came out. Gil Brandt is a former executive associate with the Dallas Cowboys and an NFL writer. And he recently came out, along with several other writers within the NFL field, lists of all-time players within certain categories, specifically by position. And I wanted to talk about this because it sparked a lot of controversy with people. People are arguing about these lists. I've read through these lists. You'll see videos on it. You'll see people writing blogs about it, people discussing in the comments, people arguing about it. And I don't understand how we've come to this point. As a football fan, I don't understand why this is so necessary. To me, these questions of, who is the greatest quarterback of all time? Who is the greatest player of all time? Who is the greatest coach of all time? These questions serve only to create arguments. And to me, people that are willing to discuss these questions really don't have a good understanding of the game itself, and so they have to just talk about these questions that ultimately are just a matter of opinion. Let me give you an example here. If I were to go around taking a survey asking who is the greatest president in the history of the United States, some people would say George Washington, others Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, Teddy Roosevelt. Those are other names that come to mind. If you ask some younger people, they may say President Obama. You ask people, they may say, yeah, President Trump is already the greatest president that this country has ever seen. Now, hold on a minute, because there are so many things that factor into what makes a good president. You have to look at the situations that they were put into, the economic relations with foreign countries. There are certain presidents that have been put in place, in times of war, in times of chaos within this country. So really, the evaluation of, oh, well, he's a good president because of this, or, he's a good president because he did this, it's all just a statement made by people who don't have an understanding of how the government system in this country works. And it really is people who ultimately just need something to talk about. It's the same thing with NFL players. It's all a matter of opinions. There is no right or wrong answer. As they say, opinions are like anuses. Everybody has one. Nobody wants to see or listen to somebody talk about their own. It's just the way that it is. Now, if you ask me, there are answers that are, how do I put this, more defendable. You can make a better argument for some answers, but that doesn't necessarily make them right. Let's be honest. If you're talking about who is the greatest quarterback of all time, I think it would be easier to make an argument for people like Tom Brady, Joe Montana, Peyton Manning, over guys such as Trent Dilfer, Randall Cunningham, Troy Aikman. Now you can make an argument for all of these players being, quote, the greatest of all time if you're intelligent enough to understand how the game itself works. Football is the ultimate team sport, and we tend to idolize specifically the quarterback position to where if something goes wrong, it's the quarterback's fault, and if something goes right, well, we give credit to the quarterback. Let me give you an example. Super Bowl 51. Tom Brady and the New England Patriots completed the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history. Tom Brady won his 4th career MVP. But a lot of people want to just give credit. Oh, it was Tom Brady. He solely won that Super Bowl because he's the GOAT. He has the it factor. He was doing things on that field that nobody's ever seen before. Those terms sound familiar. Those are terms that a lot of talk show hosts, a lot of sports writers will use, but they're all generalities. Yes, Tom Brady engineered drives, kept his cool, and was making throws, reading defenses, making the adjustments necessary to help drive his team down the field and put points on the board. But you also have a catch by Julian Edelman that was outstanding. You have the defensive sack on Matt Ryan at midfield that put them out of field goal range. There are things that happened in that game that weren't a direct result of anything that Tom Brady did that still resulted in him being able to win that football game. It's the same thing with Peyton Manning in Super Bowl 50. He did not have a spectacular regular season by any statistical means. He missed 7 games within that regular season, but ultimately he ended up winning the Super Bowl. And yes, he ended up winning the Super Bowl. The Denver Broncos won that Super Bowl, and guess what? He was the starting quarterback on that team. Everybody knows that that was the majority of a defensive effort, though. Von Miller's strip sack on Cam Newton. Another strip sack on Cam Newton. It just, there are so many things within that game that were out of Peyton Manning's control, but yet people that are supporters of Peyton Manning will look at that and say, well, yeah, he has 2 Super Bowl rings. It just, to me, it all is just so ridiculous that we go back and forth with these things. Why does it even matter? I hear all the time, people comparing Brady to Manning, and people comparing Montana to Brady, people comparing Bradshaw to Montana, people comparing Elway to Marino. I don't understand the valid purpose that serves. To me, it's all filler conversation. To me, if you're not able to sit there and watch a Peyton Manning and Tom Brady game and actually look at the adjustments that are made throughout the game, the reads that are made, the pressure that's applied by the defenses, okay, look at the injury list, see what players are injured and see what impact they have on the game. Those things are all factors that play into the outcome of a game, but yet so many people would just look at a Peyton Manning, Tom Brady game, Colts and Patriots or Broncos and Patriots and say, well, Brady's the better quarterback, so Brady's going to win this game. Or Manning's the better quarterback, so Manning's going to win this game. And it just sounds so unintelligent. And I can't stress this enough, how ridiculous it seems that everybody is paying so much attention to Gil Brandt's list. Because here's the thing, it's just an opinion. But because he has built up a certain level of credibility within the NFL as a sports writer and as a former executive of the Dallas Cowboys, we all of a sudden seem to think that his opinion holds more value than anybody else's, when really it's just an opinion. And let me tell you something. If anybody involved with any sport, watches any sport, claims that they have no bias in evaluating anything, they're wrong. Everybody has a bias. I have a bias when it comes to looking at sports and players and things of that nature. The key is to recognize the bias that is there, and so you can try to avoid it. Yes, I am a fan of an NFL team. No, I'm not going to tell you which one it is, because that is irrelevant in my point within this conversation, which is these questions of who is the greatest of all time, this player versus that player. They just don't matter. They really don't. And I get so sick of all the sports writers. You look at Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp, Stephen A. Smith, and Max Kellerman on First Take. They go back and forth all the time with these conversations of, Oh, is Aaron Rodgers a better quarterback in the NFL right now than Tom Brady? Who will get to, pass the record book of Peyton Manning, for all-time touchdowns and all-time passing yards? Is it Drew Brees or Tom Brady? These questions are irrelevant, and they're just filler questions for people that are not intelligent enough to evaluate the game for what it is. I guarantee you, if every NFL fan, every game that they watched, they had a piece of paper with them, and they wrote down how many times an offense ran the ball, how many times an offense passed the ball, how many times a defense sent 3-man pressure or 4-man pressure, and just kept track of those numbers throughout the game as opposed to focusing on, which quarterback has the it factor, which quarterback has the better advantage, then I guarantee you'd have people making more intelligent conversations within football communities. The other thing that makes this question of the greatest of all time irrelevant is there's no universal qualifications. There's no universal standard for evaluating a player. You can say it's by the numbers. Let's look at by the numbers for the quarterback position. Right now, if it's by numbers, by relevant passing numbers, Peyton Manning has the most passing touchdowns and most passing yards in NFL history. Brett Favre is second. Drew Brees is third. Tom Brady is fourth. Dan Marino is fifth. Those are your top 5 quarterbacks. Now, I know that there are a lot of people that would disagree with that list because they don't think it's right. Let's go by Super Bowl rings. Tom Brady obviously has 5. Then Bradshaw, Montana, Aikman, and let's go Eli Manning. Now, some people might ask, well, why did you say Bradshaw ahead of Montana? Well, because if you're evaluating quarterbacks by how many rings they have, then with Montana and Bradshaw both having 4 rings, I can swap them out interchangeably. That's why I put Eli Manning in that final slot. Sure, I could have put Peyton Manning or John Elway in that slot. There are a lot of quarterbacks that I could have put in that slot, but I chose to put Eli Manning. Why? Because he has 2 rings. Ben Roethlisberger. But I chose to put Eli Manning. Why? Because he has 2 rings. And so because I hear that all the time, people will say, oh, it's all about rings. Okay, then by that qualification, Eli Manning could be considered a top 5 quarterback of all time if you're going off rings. Where did these qualifications, and people don't understand, there are quarterbacks that have played with horrid offensive lines, wonderful receivers, not so good defenses, very good defenses. Those all play a part in the records that they set, in the team standings, in the playoff performances. Those all play a part in it. Every single player has something that you can say that's unique about them. Peyton Manning has 5 NFL MVPs. Tom Brady has 5 Super Bowl rings. Brett Favre has the most consecutive starts by a quarterback all time, and he has 3 straight MVPs. Montana is 4-0 in Super Bowls and never threw an interception in a Super Bowl. Bradshaw is 4-0 in Super Bowls, and he's also famous for being able to call his own plays, not having a headset in his helmet. Dan Marino, famous for his quick release, his lightning quick release that set a new standard within the NFL of, what it means to throw the ball, to be a true pocket passer. Drew Brees has 5 out of the 9 5,000-yard seasons by a quarterback. Every player has something unique. That's why these players are in the Hall of Fame, are going to be in the Hall of Fame, because they are great, and there are things that make them great. But it's worthless. It's not worth anybody's time to compare them, because ultimately it doesn't matter. There is no right or wrong answer, and it's a matter of opinions. And I think it's time that we as football fans, not as a Patriots fan, a Raiders fan, a Seahawks fan, a 49ers fan, any team in the league that you can name, it's time that as a football fan, we start looking at the game from an intelligent standpoint and we shut out all this crap that's being published by the media just to get people's attention. It's the off season right now, so I get it. Writers don't have a lot of material to work with, but yet they still got to publish something. It's their job, because football is ultimately, what is it? It's entertainment. So people are going to try to produce things that are entertaining. And yes, the question of who is the greatest quarterback of all time is an entertaining question, but it isn't relevant to anything regarding football. And here's the thing, you may very well disagree with some of the things that I've said over the course of this conversation. It's all a matter of opinions. So what I'm saying is, when we watch a football game, when we're evaluating a football player, we need to stop thinking about it in the way that we are thinking about it. Let me give you a good example of what I'm talking about. Fantasy football is a big deal in today's world, in the NFL today. Let me tell you the big flaw with that. It's all based off of statistics. The biggest problem that I see with that is people only focus on the statistics. If Antonio Brown doesn't have, a 300-yard game for 2 touchdowns, people get mad and they're like, oh, he's not a good receiver. But yet people aren't looking at the game from the standpoint of, he blocked the corner on the backside so that they could run the sweep 5 times with Le'Veon Bell for 60 yards. And he served as a decoy and required double coverage from the safety and the corner to allow Martavis Bryant to get open. Those are things that people don't look at, because why? It's all based on stats. And if you're a good player, it's about stats. Same thing with the running backs. Ezekiel Elliott, let's take him for example. He only has a 50-yard game. The Cowboys win the game, but people are saying, what's wrong with Ezekiel Elliott? Because he only had a 50-yard game. But yet the defense was so focused on stacking people in the box, it allowed Dak Prescott to open up and really fling the ball down the field. It's a matter of adjustments. And so Ezekiel Elliott, that's more effective. It's arguably more effective for a player in a football game to serve as a decoy. The defense is so focused on stopping him that they're not focused on stopping Des Bryant, on Cole Beasley, on Jason Witten, on Dak Prescott's mobility. And then all of a sudden the Cowboys can exploit whatever team they're playing, the Eagles. They can exploit their defense and win the game. See, but people don't think about that because it's all about statistics. But that doesn't mean anything. People think that as a wide receiver, your number one job in this league is to catch touchdown passes. Your job as I would rather have a receiver that serves as a wonderful decoy, someone that requires more attention from the defensive side, because that's more useful to the football team. Sure, they don't pile on the stats. They don't load up the stat sheet, but they're a useful part of my football team. And that's what I'm talking about. That's the type of thing that as fans right now, we're blind to, because we're so wrapped up in this idea of instant gratification and, oh, does it look pretty? And do we get excited by it? People don't like defensive football games anymore because it's not exciting enough for them. If you look at the way the league has changed the rules so that defensive players are at a bit of a handicap. They can't hit like they used to. That is all designed so that the league can open up more with its passing game. That's no secret. Everybody knows that. Those rules were intended so that the passing game could become more and more common. I remember in the 1980s, if you threw the ball more than 20 times in a game, you were not going to win a football game because it just wasn't going to happen. You had to run the ball. Every team had a good running back. There were teams with good quarterbacks, but it was more common to see good running backs in the league in the 1980s, in the 70s, and the 80s. Now, in the 90s and in the 2000s, it was, well, every team has a good quarterback because if you can throw the ball, that's really good. Now you know what it's becoming? If a team has a good wide receiver, then they'll be able to win football games. Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, Des Bryant, Odell Beckham Jr., Demaryius Thomas. I can name all these names. I've drawn a blank right now. Jordy Nelson for the Green Bay Packers. And then you can go on A.J. Green for the Cincinnati Bengals. You can go on to secondary receivers. Rob Gronkowski and Julian Edelman for the Patriots. Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree for the Raiders. Jimmy Graham is with the Seahawks. I mean, now everybody has a good receiver because that's becoming, quote unquote, the most important position on the football field. But it's all irrelevant and it's threatening to destroy the game. Our perception of the game has become so warped. And we as fans look at the game from a faulty perspective, I think, because it's all a matter of arguments. Can I win an argument? Am I on the right side of an argument? That's why I have a problem with these Gil Brandt's list of the greatest players of all time. I know that people are blowing up because he had Ronnie Lott at number 5 for safety. He had Ezekiel Elliott at 26 for running back. He had Emmitt Smith at 10, Barry Sanders at 8. I mean, I can go on and on about specific things that people had a problem with. Steve Smith wasn't on the wide receiver list. Michael Irvin was number 21. You can go on and on about the specific problems that people have on this list, but my problem with it is that people aren't looking at the game like it's supposed to be looked at. How can you even compare players from this era? Look at players like Joe Namath, Jim Brown, Otto Grant, Bart Starr, Johnny Unitas. How do you compare quarterbacks like those and Jim Brown being a running back? How do you compare those players to players of today? Given the rule changes, the equipment changes, the changes in the body builds of these players. The players today are faster, stronger. All the evolution of the game itself in terms of the complexity of the game plans, both on the offensive and defensive side. How do you compare a guy like Joe Namath to Aaron Rodgers? I think if you were to take a survey, most people would say that Aaron Rodgers is a better quarterback than Joe Namath. But that isn't even a fair comparison to make. You shouldn't even compare guys like Montana to Aaron Rodgers because it doesn't make sense. The game has changed so much and we've forgotten that. You can't just all lump them together as football players. Now, yes, is it fair to say, okay, let's compare Drew Brees to Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady to Peyton Manning? That's a little bit better, but to me, it still is a waste of time. As an NFL fan first, as a football fan first, I think it's time for us as football fans to focus on the game and what makes the game so beautiful. It is an art form. This is the ultimate team sport, and the complexity within this game, if you study it, if you learn it, and it's a simple thing to learn, if you put time into it, these questions of who is the greatest player of all time, who is the greatest quarterback of all time, who's the greatest running back, wide receiver, etc., those things become irrelevant because the game itself satisfies the purpose of entertainment. And you don't need anything else to serve as entertainment for you. Please, I ask, if you're going to comment, please leave the comments clean. I understand if you disagree with me on things that I've said. Again, it's just an opinion. My opinion is no better than yours, but I feel the